The Les Paul is back, but this time, it's personal. Welcome back, troglodytes, to your daily dose guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Needless to say, we are in for a real treat here, but to understand this guitar, we need to do a little bit of history first. The Les Paul electric guitar was first introduced for the 1952 model year. It looked like this, had a trapeze tailpiece, but it was named after a guy, Lester Pulfus, shortened down to Les Paul. He was a very phenomenal guitarist that invented things like multi-track recording. He and Mary Ford dominated the airwaves in the 50s, and we saw his signature guitar transform how it first came out to having a wrap tailpiece, to having an ABR1, eventually getting humbuckers on it, and then changing into what is now known as the SG body shape before the Les Paul name was removed in 1963. However, due to people picking up bursts and making them popular again, in 1968 Gibson brings them back, reissued as the Les Paul Standard, P90 pickups again, and the Les Paul Custom. However, as they were reintroducing the Les Paul, I bet Les told them, hey, how about we make something that I want specifically this time? And thus birthed the low-impedance series of guitars. So, you've got two main ones at introduction of September of 1969. It was the Les Paul Personal, which we're talking about today, and the Les Paul Professional. The easiest way to think of these is one is the Les Paul Custom, one is the Les Paul Standard. For example, the Personal gets golden hardware around our pickups as well as on the bridge and tailpiece, including your tuners, but you also have the custom emblem, you get the multi-banded binding, straight up ebony fretboard with your mother-of-pearl block inlay. However, on the Professional, it's rosewood fretboard and Doranwood trapezoid inlays, no binding on the headstock, and chrome. Now, how they're the same is the fact that we have the low impedance pickups on all of them. Les preferred this because he was all about super ultra clear tones. He wanted to record in the purest form possible, and that's why these things were birthed. They have very unique fretboards to them. They get chopped off at the top right here, but this one had something additional. An XLR jack on the side of your guitar with an independent volume control. That's so you could plug a mic in and talk into it, because Les liked to do that when he was performing. He wanted to talk to his audience, and he didn't want to have to worry about where the mic is on stage. It just followed him. And these are bigger than a normal Les Paul. Here's a nice little size comparison. Usually the lower bout is 13 inches on a Les Paul, but on these they're 14. Now, what other model do we know of that's about an inch bigger in all dimensions? That's right, the Buckethead Les Paul. Now, I do believe this is slightly larger than these guys, but still, it gets you in the correct mindset that these were larger than usual. Here's an official size comparison of all of them. Now remember, the Buckethead is a baritone, so it's longer, so I've tried to compensate for that to make the bodies about even. So this one is 18.5 inches long, whereas on a regular Les Paul, I measured 17.25, so that's about an inch and a half longer. However, Buckethead is 19 inches, so it's even longer. And then we have a 10.5 inch bout versus the usual 9, and then we have a 10 inch right here. So this one's the king as far as the wideness on the upper bout, even dethroning the oversized Buckethead. But you can definitely see the difference as compared to a regular Les Paul. That's only 9 inches right there. So again, another inch and a half difference. But now for your lower bout, it's 14 inches. That matches the Buckethead perfectly, whereas a regular Les Paul is 13. So that's another inch wider. So as compared to another Les Paul, inch and a half, 1 inch. That is the best visual display I can give you for one of these. And similar to the original Les Paul Customs, they are completely crafted out of mahogany, so you do not have a maple top on these. The spec sheets actually call it a British Honduran mahogany, but at launch was advertised at $645 brand new, which was $70 more expensive than a Les Paul Custom at that time, just to put it into a frame of reference, whereas the Les Paul Professional was $485. But something to keep in mind about these is they were birthed in that era when Gibson was getting a little squirrely. So they do have things like a pancake body construction, 3-piece laminated necks with volutes, nylon saddles. But if you're curious how many Personals were ever made, shipping ledgers indicate 2 were shipped out in 69, 222 in 1970, and then from there it just tapers off. 71 had 95, 1972, 49, and then 1973, a measly 2. And just to make things even more fun, occasionally you can find a stock Bigsby version as well. Now, why did things start to taper off? It's simply because this model was not all that popular, and they decided to revise it. In late 1971, coming out for the 1972 model year, was the Les Paul recording. It's basically a blending of the professional and the personal to become Les's all-time favorite guitar. It was top-routed. It had the transformer built into the guitar. These two previous models, you have to have a special transformer cable. Otherwise, you can't plug it into a regular guitar amp. But then around 1976, they changed it up even more. They gave them maple tops as well as the maple neck. And then they only lasted till like late 79, early 1980 until they were just discontinued until Gibson brought them back in 2013 as the Les Paul Recording 2, which you can check out in this episode to learn more about the Les Paul recording in general. Oh, and don't forget about the Les Paul Jumbo Flat Top, as well as the Les Paul Bass and the Les Paul Signature to complete out your low-impedance series guitars. Oh, and don't forget about the L5S. The very early ones did have the low-impedance pickups, but then they went humbuckers, and people forgot about them. So nowadays, when it comes to the personal and professional, collectors like the personal because of the weird oddity of the mic being able to be plugged into it, whereas generally speaking, the pros aren't very desirable because, let's face it, these are solid-bodied guitars. They're bigger than a normal Les Paul. They are heavy. Those professionals, I've had them. They average about 13 pounds, believe it or not. This one, I'd imagine, is around 11, so it's not too bad. I actually bought this one in March of 2022. And I've been waiting to review this because I've wanted to find the original correct mic. I'm sorry, I gave up. I finally broke down and bought a modern one. But if anybody has the nice metal looking one that's fully flexible from the era, I would love to reunite this guitar with it. But oh man, I'm so excited for this. Yeah, there we go. This has to be the coolest feature to ever be built into a Les Paul. But there's actually a pretty good story behind this guitar too. Because you might have noticed, for its age, circa, 1971-ish is what I was told when I bought it. We'll have to find out as we tear it apart. This is in exceptionally clean condition. I mean, look at this case. There's hardly anything wrong with it. Like a few scuffs here and there, but even the latches are just so pristine and new. They have a great feel to them yet. But I purchased this from a gentleman who lives in Michigan, Rob. He was like a local radio celebrity, and he had contacted me one day saying we should talk about this if I'm interested, and he gave me the history. He purchased this from the original owner around 1982. His music hangout store at the time was located in Keego Harbor, Michigan, and it went by the name Pontiac Music and Sound. In the old days, they were a Gibson dealer, but they had this customer who was not a player. He would just buy guitars and put them under the bed. He was a little bit ahead of his time, I guess you could say. But occasionally, he would become financially embarrassed and would have to bring one back to the shop to cash it out. And it's at that time that Rob, the guy who I purchased this from, got a call by the shop because he had just did some work for them building soundproof rooms for lessons. And so the store owner started to describe it. Hey, we've got this guitar. It says Les Paul on it, but I've never seen one like this. And he said, hey, does it have this like cannon plug on the upper bout? And then the store owner said, yeah, it does. So he's rushing to the store to get it as soon as he could, which helped remove some of the debt for the work that he had did for him. And from 1982 till about 2008, he had kept this guitar. But this time it was his turn to be financially embarrassed. So Rob called up his old high school drummer who lived in Colorado because he was looking to invest in some other things rather than what he normally did, which was planes and real estate. So he had told him about this guitar and he had just had it appraised. He got a nice little value out of it. So Rob said he would sell that guitar to him at that number. And he thought, yeah, that's a good idea. He bought it. But unfortunately, several years later, he passed away from an aggressive cancer, and he left it to him in his will. So there it goes, back to Rob, where it sat until 2022 when he reached out to me and said, hey, you want this? Poor Rob's been really patient waiting for this video. I think I initially told him, yeah, it'd be like 3 weeks. Yeah, turned into 3 years. I'm sorry. I was just trying to find that microphone. Not only is this one nice and clean, it's got a lot of cool case candy to it, such as what looks like an original tag, reading Les Paul Personal. There we go. We can verify that 1971 date. Looks like halfway through the year. The back looks like so. This is the Gibson owner's manual, essentially. I'm curious if it was ever filled out in the back. Nope, we still have the card back here. This is like ridiculously clean. Then I think this is talking about the case. I don't think I've ever seen that. That's pretty cool. And then this is the thing that you've been seeing some snippets out of with the original Les Paul. Cool. The deluxe is in here as well as the personal, professional. that jumbo. But apparently they also had some amplifiers in this series. And then for good measure, some magazine clippings. Oh, and don't forget the original case key. I should go ahead and throw this one on the workbench to see what makes it tick, and then we'll get to a playing sample. I had a personal dilemma on this one. You can smell the 70s off of this thing, like in a good way. You can tell this thing has not been seriously heavily gigged at any point in time, just mildly enjoyed. So I've always been torn. Do I polish this one up? Like, it's not too bad right now, but I could make it better. But I made the executive decision that that's probably going to cause more scratches than it already has, so I let this one go. However, if you looked earlier, there were some pretty deep scratches on this. So I did polish the pick guard, and that removed them from being heavily visible anyway, but they're definitely still there in the light. And I helped out the black plastics just a tad and polished our frets and conditioned our board, and I'll put new strings on it. But otherwise, I decided to leave it untouched. But as far as our pickups, these things are quite chunky. I measure 1 1/4 inch thick. That's kind of similar to like what you would find on the L6S series in the future, where these wires, they're not as secure as the Gibson shielded braiding style, but not as weak as the L6S's. But still, be careful if you're ever messing with one of these, because good luck finding replacements. They are out there, but usually they're expensive. But here we can see our kind of transitional neck tenon here, so that's always fun. But this is just a huge route out of the body. But if you're curious where the pancake body starts, you can see it right there at the bottom. That's where the maple layer is. But it's got a channel cavity route right there that the wires go through. Then all those come over there, and then it comes down diagonally here, where you see more of the same as far as all of your routes are concerned. And then your bridge pickup wires just continue on down through there. But if you ever need to verify or work on one of these, and you're trying to get these off, it's just these 2 screws and these 2. The 3 slightly larger ones are actually height adjustments. So you've got your normal one on this side and another one over here, but you have a tilt function up here like you would find on the Les Paul in the future. Not all pickups have a tilt this way, but these are fancy. But as is common in this era, they utilized a true ABR1 bridge, post-mounted into the body. But check out just how clean this one is. The gold is in exceptional shape. And once again, we've got the nylon saddles. That is a stock thing. This is a wire retainer version of the Gibson ABR1. Same thing's true for our tailpiece. Great shape here, and it is lightweight aluminum. Now let's talk about our electronics. Starting up here, this is actually different from the Professional that I had. Or it could just be that I wasn't skilled enough to know what I was looking at that time, because that was towards the beginning of my career when I last had one of those. It does have a regular poker chip over top of it, but then underneath that is a rubber gasket / grommet. But you might have noticed that the wording is backwards from usual. Usually it's rhythm treble facing this way, but this one says rear and front, and it's facing you, the player. But this knob right here, if you're a rocker picker, that might be in your way. You might not want this one, but that is there to control the volume of the microphone. And that utilizes a high quality XLR jack. It's got a push release, so it does lock into place. And here's what that looks like on the inside. It's just connected and then goes through all your wiring that you saw there. Like, I'm curious, could somebody use that and like put distortion on with it too? Just use whatever effects you have on your pedal board with your voice. But as far as I'm aware, this is the only model that ever came stock with this. But Les typically put these on his personal guitars. I did a whole series where we went through his estate auction and talked about his favorite ones, the coolest ones to me, as well as the rarest, so feel free to check those out. But now let's come down here. So we do have a faceplate right here that's secured by 4 golden screws, but when this comes off, for some reason I thought this would be connected to that. It's still technically back routed. It's just so routed in here that you need something a little bit fancy to cover it. But this is back in the era when they were using the pantograph machine to finally etch these. So those aren't silk screened letters and numbers here. It's actually engraved into the plastic. So this is a 3-ply material, black, white, black. They just scrape away the black layer to reveal the white to make it look so cool. And it utilizes a little pilgrim hat as your switch tip. But here's where things get interesting. The knobs. They're black reflectors with a golden topper, but take a close look at how they're labeled. First one's volume. I think that's self-explanatory. The volume of your pickups. The next one is decade. This is not a knob that moves like this. Think of it like a rotary switch, kind of like a baritone. There are 11 different settings on this thing, ranging from 0 all the way to 10. We'll see this a bit later on, but what that is doing is you're selecting a different capacitor. So it's kind of like a low-pass filter that you can program yourself to whatever tuning that you want. It's something you'll just have to experience in the playing demo. But our next one reads treble, so you can roll off the highs, and then the next one actually says bass. You can roll off the lows. But now onto the controls here. This is an in and out of phase switch that is only going to be pertinent when both pickups are on together in like the middle position. If it's just the bridge or neck, it's not going to do anything different. That gives you that quacky sound. Most times you're going to leave it in phase, but it's there if you need it. Now tone selector is kind of confusing because you're not actually selecting tones, you're selecting circuits. So for example, on number 1 for this one, it takes all these fancy ones out of the circuit, whereas number 2 has those in it. And then you can also utilize your 3-way toggle switch. And then most things I read online say position 3 should technically take everything out of the circuit and just be these two together at the same time. But mine doesn't act like that. So maybe there were some variances throughout, or I don't know. All I know is it does work and it's functional. But there's one more thing I wanted to mention. Instead of thumb bleeders on this one that can poke you, they have these metal rivets in the guitar. They just act as a pointer so you know where you are on the knob. 0 through 10. Just a little bit of a visual cue. Something that's not going to move, I guess you could say. One more look at our pickguard. Basically, it only looks strange because it's cut out for the oblong oval shapes of our pickups. It does a good job of hiding most of the pickup rings so they don't become too obnoxious. But on the back, I found an open bracket. Then they have this little gummy spacer, which you can see still discolors the finish a little bit. But the whole bracket's really curved on this one. It's got a couple of bends in it rather than just one. As far as the top carve, does it have one? Yes. But remember, you're in the beginning years of the Norlin era. It's not quite as dished as you might want it from like the 50s or so. But our personal is a fancy boy. You can see all your multi-banded binding running along here. Something about all the binding this one gets just makes it look so much fancier than the professional. Even though both of these are pretty well considered outdated by the Les Paul recording, this one still has enough fanciness to it that I think it remains relevant to collectors. But that top does appear to be one piece. So with your pancake construction, that means you've got a slab of mahogany up here that got carved, and then a slab of mahogany back here just for the back. With our mahogany neck and ebony fretboard, I wanted to pay special attention down here. So I don't think the reason why they sliced this had anything to do with the actual fretboard or playability itself. It's because these giant pickups and how they go at an angle. It just kind of is visually pleasing, I guess you could say. And maybe Les really wanted that, so instead of just cutting the fretboard and then making this look extra bare, that was their best option, and it gave them one more fret of additional access for your higher strings. But this example does indeed have fret nibs. They're just very small in this era. But to my surprise, yes, there's technically a giant fret nib along the edge right here. They could have ran that over the binding if they wanted to, but they do indeed cover over that end. That's just nice attention to detail that I've never noticed before. But what shocked me so much about this one is you can tell they really rolled the edge of this fretboard insanely. As you can see where the regular lacquer is and how it's aged over the years versus the rolling process that they did. Now, to be fair, this is the first one I've documented. Is it possible somewhere early on in its life somebody had the edges rolled? Yes. That's just something I guess I'll have to look at some more examples in the future. But this fretboard cleaned and conditioned beautifully. I measure a 12-inch fretboard radius with a 24 3/4 inch scale. Then we have a bone nut that measures 1.68 inches. 2.04 at the 12th, a first fret neck depth of 0.87, and it reads 1.04 at the 12th, 1.02 at the 10th. I think the best way to describe this neck is it starts off as kind of a fuller, chunkier C shape, but as you come up here, it really transitions into like a deep U. It gets rid of all the shoulders very quickly, but it does chunk up. But yet the neck feels rather narrow despite those measurements that we just took. Here's a look at that neck profile at the first fret and the 12th fret. You can see what I'm talking about. Regular C, but then over here the shoulders just slope away so fast as compared to what you have up here, making more of a U-shaped neck. Now we can move on to our headstock. Now, if you're trying to verify your Les Paul Professional and you have a true 69 example, those will utilize a pantograph inlay. So if it starts flaking or falling off, that is considered normal behavior. I've seen that on plenty of professionals. However, I don't think I've seen it on one of these because I think they utilized a different headstock veneer technique because they have the fancy Gibson custom emblem and all the fancy binding. I thought this was cool. You can see the beveled edge right here that exposes the wood underneath, but our truss rod's in good shape on this one. And just like our etchings over here, same is true on our truss rod cover. I just love the depth of it. It just looks so good. I wish we could get more of this, but that is a 3-ply material, black, white, and black. One more thing I noticed on the headstock that might suggest that all that rounding is factory is it looks like when they were initially buffing this, they really rounded off that corner. There's a little bit of that on this side too, but not as much. You can also see a little bit was shaven on this side. But if you look closely on the body, you can also notice a few areas of that along here. For the most part, it's good. But right here where the pickguard is, you can see a similar phenomenon there. Those are just the small nitpicky things that you start to notice about a guitar the more and more you look at it. And as we flip it on over to the back, you can see some of that there. I might be saying, hey Trogly, how do we know that that didn't happen after the fact? Early 70s. I've experienced this quite often with really, really clean examples. Another good one is my Brazilian Rosewood Les Paul Custom, the Yeti. It has that similar process going on along the side of the neck. As far as the back, this one is equally as clean, but there is a pretty nasty scratch right here. Rob said this happened when he first inherited this back. He must have had a belt buckle on or something, because otherwise it was definitely very well taken care of. But let's talk about these electronics. So this is a giant back plate, and it's covering over this. The wiring really is not as crazy as you might think it is. It's just 4 pots with a whole bunch of different capacitors wired to different switches. So finding out what goes to where, yeah, that's gonna take some time, but it's not like a robot guitar. They do have a shielding plate along here on the back, but this is our volume pot. It dates to the 40th week of 1970. However, what's different from usual is you can see you've got a couple of different capacitors linked together there on the legs of the pots. This one's your decade knob, so as you turn it, it makes different selections of capacitors are all attached to these. So I would imagine the different positions like gives you a combination of them as well as them by themselves. I'm not an expert when it comes to the wiring and understanding all that, but it allows you to tune it into what you want. This one is your bass control knob dating to the 39th week of 1970. Again, you see some capacitors attached to it that you don't normally see. And then this is your treble roll off. Nothing too crazy going on the top. It dates to the 39th week of 1970 as well. And then you got one little thing right there. And then there's a whole bunch more resistors and stuff connected to your toggle switch. So yeah, there's a lot going on here, but there's a good amount of room in here if you wanted to throw something else there. Then our mic route. It requires a slightly elongated toggle switch cavity and looks like this. So that's the end of the mic that we saw earlier. You can see your regular toggle switch right here. And then we've got another pot here, also dating to the 39th week of 1970. But again, that is controlling the volume of this. There is kind of a funny factory boo-boo here. You can see they didn't leave themselves much of a ledge to put the screws in to secure the back plate. I mean, these ones on the bottom are fine, but the top actually ran so short they ran out of space here. So the worker's idea of fixing that is utilizing an extra long screw. Now again, this is the first one I've ever torn apart, but I'd be curious if anybody else's is like that, but I do believe that to be factory original. But our output jack plate is also made of 3-ply plastic, black, white, black. You've got a strap button down here and another one in your usual location. And we can look along the edges to help you appreciate the pancake body construction a little bit more, as well as see what kind of condition we've got and appreciate our double bound body. That appears to be 5-ply on the back, 7-ply on the front. I really do wonder, is it the binding that makes this look so nice? 'Cause not to talk bad about the professionals, but I'm just not a big fan of those, but the personal is so cool. And I really do think it comes down to the binding, just making this trick your eye into thinking, oh yeah, it's just a regular Les Paul, even though it's like massive. But this neck profile is really cool. If you ever see one of these in the wild, do give it a try. Kind of reminds me of what you find on the L5S necks. But there is a little bit of a scuff on the neck right there. And then our pot codes tell us this was made in late 1970. The tag tells us it sold at the store in mid-71. So I would call this one a 1970. It's got a very prominent volute. However, if you get a really early one, you can potentially find one voluteless or with a very, very small one. This one's actually very big for the era. And of course, we've got the golden waffle back tuners. They're not very good. Even a minty example like this, they're very stiff, and they're well known for not holding tune the best and becoming loose. But when that happens, just replace it with a modern day equivalent. They're drop-in and they function. But our serial number doesn't really tell us anything in this era, but it's 966906. And we have our Made in USA stamp, which again is one of those new things Norlin was trying. But how was my guess on the weight? I was pretty close. 10 pounds, 15.1 ounces. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how this beast sounds. Test, test, 1, 2, 3, talking to you from the guitar. All right, let's go ahead and see what these tones are like. We're going to start in position 1, which bypasses these fancy knobs, so it's going to be just the pickups themselves. Needless to say, that is not your regular sounding Les Paul, and that's probably why so many guys in the 70s were very confused by this, because they were trying to play different stuff with distortion added. But if you're trying to play jazzy stuff, you're going to really enjoy these guitars. So that's just our pickups. Let's switch into the 2 position, which brings in our decade, the bass and treble roll off. Let's demonstrate that on the neck pickup. So it goes from this to this. And anywhere in between. But now we'll demonstrate the treble knob utilizing our bridge pickup this time. This acts a lot like a regular tone control, but not exactly. Like, it still gets darker and cuts off some of your highs, but that's not exactly what it's doing. much more useful on the neck. Don't forget you can also use that with the decade knob. So down here, if it's too nasally for you, besides switching it, you can also play around with that. And now let's demonstrate our bass roll off. We'll stick with the neck because that seems to work the best with these. And don't forget, I mean, you can blend both of these to get your desired position. Guitars like these are a nightmare for me because I want to show you every single possible tone, but I run out of things to play, and the possibilities are literally endless. But we'll put all that onto regular now. If you're curious what position 1 does, it takes these guys out of the circuit again, but leaves your decade in. It still lets me select the other pickups. Some wiring diagrams say it's supposed to just be both together. I'm not exactly sure, but I do find 2 to be the most full position. But the only thing left to demonstrate on the guitar is your in and out of phase, so that is only going to work when you're operating both pickups together. Otherwise, you're just going to be doing a placebo effect on whether you think something's changed or not. Thus far, everything we've done has been in phase. But out of phase sounds like this. We've seen it time and time again, Peter Green quackiness. And don't forget, you can also toy around with the decade switch with that as well. My only regrets is I wish I knew how to play more like Les, because I'd made the mistake of listening to some of his playing, and then it's like, oh, yeah, I'm not there yet. But what do you guys think? I think there's a lot of very usable tones, and there's a lot of Les in here, 100%. It might not be for the everyday average player, but if you're looking for something different to inspire you, that's who this is for. Now, I might be curious, can you run it through a distortion pedal and make Les roll in his grave? He was trying to get rid of that stuff with these low impedance pickups. The answer is yes, but it gets noisy because it doesn't like the impedances, but I'll go ahead and do it for you. Here's the ambient noise before I plug it in, and the ambient noise after I plug it in. But this is my normal demo setting where it rocks out pretty hard. But on this guitar, even on the bridge, it doesn't distort. So here's a reminder of what it sounds like without distortion. And here it is with distortion. still stays ridiculously clean and clear. It's just got more oomph to it. So is it unusable with distortion? No, it's not. It's just different, and I could see why somebody would not want this in that time period. Nowadays, I think most people could find a use for this. So there we go, the Les Paul Personal, the fanciest of the low impedance series guitars. Gotta come clean, I was not using the mic. I'm sorry. I even went out and bought a second mic for it, because the TA5212 is a condenser microphone that I didn't know needed phantom power. Of course a Les Paul Personal from 1972 can't give it that. But sadly, even a dynamic microphone that does not need a power source, I could not get it to work. I even tried this to get it working. It's a Rode NTG2. Not exactly what it's known for, but if you connect an XLR to it, you can power this mic with a AA battery. But unfortunately, even this kind of janky setup didn't work. So I don't know what I'm doing wrong here. I tried. I'm sorry. So needless to say, I'm bummed. I was really looking forward to trying that microphone out, but maybe somebody out here in YouTube land can help direct me in the right direction. Do I have to have a vintage mic for it to work? Is there something weird with these new ones? Or is there something wrong with the jack itself, or maybe even the pot? I just don't know.
But to give you an idea of what it would actually sound like, it'd be something like this. I've got a regular microphone plugged into my Marshall, and how does distortion sound with it? Honestly, it's not as crazy as I thought it was going to be, but it does get a little bit squirrely and squealy. And that's before we get...
But as far as an instrument, just get yourself a Les Paul recording, unless you actually need this, or you're a collector or somebody who loves something that's a little bit different and super ultra quirky that not everyone can own, because they really didn't make that many of these things. As a Les Paul recording is going to be a lot less expensive, it's not going to be as heavy, and it's a little bit more refined. So these are more so relegated as parts of Les's history. But that doesn't mean that they're not great guitars. I had a great time with this one. I hate to say it, but I really like the distorted channel. But if I was a better player and could do some more jazzy stuff, I think this is just something you gotta sit down with and learn and have a good time. You get great jazzy tones out of these low impedance pickups. So my friends, I hope you enjoyed and learned something new. And finally, I can say I did it. Take care.